It's about 1 o'clock in June 23rd, 2004, and we're in the Atlanta History Center. And today we're taking an oral history from Bedford Davis Jr., Marion Bedford Davis Jr., physician who fought in World War II. Dr. Davis, if you'll give us your name, spell anything you think there might be a problem with, and date of birth, and then tell us a little bit about your early life.
I'm Marion Bedford Davis, and I dropped the junior after my father died. I was born October 11, 1918, just 1 month before the end of World War I. My parents lived in the little town of Abbeville, South Carolina, and we were part of a railroad family. And this is of interest because of a very special event when I came home from the war. But we had passes, and during the war, after the war, I was able to travel on a card pass free of any expense. Also, the president of the railroad was a close friend of my father's. He took a liking to me and tried to get me to go to Columbia University in New York and study railroad management. He said he would grease the way for me to be a president of the Seaboard Railroad. My mother wanted me to be a preacher, and she would have really had a huge shock if I had taken that railroad job up. But I didn't do it. I also didn't do what she wanted me to do, which was to make a minister. I never thought I had it in me to be a minister. I had two options when I went to college. I graduated from the first four-year class at North Fulton High School, and then went to Emory University, and spent most of my life at Emory University till World War came along.
Give us some years, just graduated high school in what year?
1935.
And then Emory just right away.
And I was still 16 when I entered Emory. And you never know whether you can get in medical school or not. So I arranged it so I could have a backup option, and that was to be a research chemist. And I took, besides my requirements for medical school, enough chemistry courses. I like one course in physical chemistry to allow myself a full degree in chemistry. But I found myself in the enviable position. I had planned then to take 3 years of medical school when I found out I could get into medical school.
At Emory?
At Emory. At the end of the second year, the dean of the medical school called me in and wanted me to go into medical school a year early. If I did that, I couldn't get my college degree, and that didn't suit me. And I would have been in the South Pacific instead of Europe during World War II, and I'd have been in the Army a year sooner. So I think I made the right choice. I got my degree in college. I got my MD degree. And
what years were these? Bachelor's degree?
I graduated from medical school in 1942. I was right in the middle of my junior year in medical school. There were 6 of us working emergency clinic that Sunday at Grady Hospital when the radio announced that Pearl Harbor had been bombed. During the next week, our whole medical class was gathered together and met by members of the Selective Service organization, and they told us that we were all going to be taken into the service, and that if we would accept their offer, at that point, we could sign and be a second lieutenant in the Medical Administrative Corps. And we were in that position then. We would not be drafted, and we would be allowed to finish medical school, which was a year and a half off. And then we would be given a first lieutenant medical corps, and we were allowed a year of internship at whatever hospital we chose and accepted us. And at the end of that time, you would be taken into service. They promised us a year in the United States before we would be shipped overseas. In fact, you had to get 12 months of service to get your American Theater ribbon to go on your uniform pocket. I was put in the 98th Infantry Division first, and we left her sitting in front of a hotel where she had tried to get a room for that night. And any new officer is always officer of the day. And that means you cannot leave post. I had to send a friend to let her know to go home. 2 weeks from a foxhole, I was given instructions that another division needed replacements before they'd ever gone to war. And the 98th Division spent a year at Fort McClellan while I went to the 28th Division at Camp Pickett, where everybody was already confined to posts, ready to be shipped overseas.
What gives the date on that? Do you remember the date?
It was early September. Well, it was later in September because I had my 25th birthday shipping out from Boston.
Is that in 43?
Yes. The 98th Division spent their year in Alabama, and they were shipped to guard Schofield Barracks and make sure that the Japanese didn't attack on the ground. They are the only division in the whole United States Army that never fired a bullet at an enemy or had an enemy fire a bullet at them. And we got into all sorts of hornets' nests. But I shipped overseas. When I came back on the, I guess it was 7th of November, I went on terminal leave. The personnel committee called and said, "Do you know, we don't have the dates you went through the infiltration course. You familiar with the infiltration course? When you finish your boot training, your graduation escapade is to crawl 100 yards through mud, under barbed wire, with machine guns firing 24 inches above the ground. And then you're supposed to be exposed to combat." I didn't have that. And they said, "You know, we don't have the dates you went through the infiltration course." I said, "I didn't go through the infiltration course until I landed troops on French soil." And they said, "Well, you couldn't have gone overseas without it." And I made a bet, but they didn't take me up on it. But they shipped me so fast. And I had to tell her goodbye, and I had to beg because we weren't supposed to get out of post, confined for shipment overseas. I finally got somebody to hear my plea, and the Jeep and the driver brought me to the railroad station, and she was fixing to step on the stool that allows you to climb up into the railroad coach. And that was our goodbye.
Where was it?
This was at Camp Pickett, Petersburg, Virginia, wasn't it? Blackstone. Okay.
Okay, so you took the boat across the sea and landed where? You were on the ocean on your 25th birthday.
Yeah, and I think it was the 17th of October, when we turned south down the channel between Ireland and Scotland. And in the middle of one of Britain's worst winters ever, we unloaded at Cardiff, Wales. We rode a train till we came, and I don't know where we got off that train, but we were carried by trucks, open trucks, to a little place called Lansawel, Lansawel. It had 72 houses in it. I counted them all. And we were put in a totally destroyed camp that would hold 400 people. The battalion has 800 GIs in normal strength. So half of the 112th Regiment was stationed in this place. A group of British Marines had occupied it before. The heating system, and it was beginning to get pretty good winter by the end of October, was a 3-inch cast pipe that went all around the officers' barracks, and there was a fireplace in what was sort of a day room at the end of the officers' barracks. But you could see weeds growing up underneath the floor through the subflooring. For light, we had no electricity. We had, once a week, you were given a 6-inch by 1-inch white candle. That was to serve as your heat and light at that time. Now, we had no running water. There was a system that picked up water from halfway up a mountainside from a spring, and it poured into a masonry cistern, but there was no way to sterilize the water. The cistern was dirty, and there was a break in the pipe that delivered water from the spring. Our commander was Major Robert Hayslett, and he was quite a military guy. His father was a general and had a job in the Pentagon, but Robert Hayslett was a plumbing contractor in civilian life. He was a major in rank, and he and I became very good friends because the two of us put that camp, Trade Log was the name of the camp, into livable condition. And our friendship continued even after we crossed the channel in combat, because he, part of the time, was the commander of the 112th Regiment. But I inherited number one driver. We were supposed to have in each medical detachment 2 jeeps, 2 drivers, and 2 assistant drivers. The number one driver for the outfit couldn't get along with my boss. I was the assistant battalion surgeon to start with because it was planned there should be 2 medical officers to run each battalion. One, the commanding officer, was working in the aid station. The assistant battalion surgeon's job was to sweep the battlefield and make sure that all the wounded were cared for. And you were sort of a scout and explorer. But 4 days after we went into combat, I came back from my exploit of exploration, and the guy says, "Captain Wolf, disappeared, and we think he's been taken prisoner. He said he wanted to see if he could find a Luger pistol. You don't find Luger pistols on the battlefield. They disappear before the fighting soldiers have gone. And Captain Wolfe was a prisoner of the Germans, and they kept him for 2 weeks, treating their wounded. And all the prisoners came through my aid station, and I never had any trouble getting any questions I asked answered. A cup of coffee and a few kind words to a German prisoner, and he had no hesitancy about telling you his any questions that you wanted. And we kept up with what was happening to Captain Wolfe, and after 2 weeks, they shipped him off to a POW camp.
Let me go back a little bit. Exactly when did you cross the channel to go to France, and where did you land? So we need to pick up that.
We did not actually go into combat until the 17th of July, and I cannot tell you the exact date that we took off, but I did not go with the major part of my group. I was put on a Liberty ship, and there were 3,000 of us loaded onto that ship, and we crossed the channel and anchored not inside but outside that sunken ship jetty that was constructed to make the beach more tenable.
You landed right at Normandy at the
Saint-Laurent-sur-Mer, which was Omaha Beach. And the day we landed, we thought they forgot we were out there. But I ate at the captain's table, and at lunch, the day we were to land, he says, "Do you know, next to me, you're the ranking officer on this ship?" And I says, "No, what does that mean?" "It means that you're in command of this group landing on the shore." I says, "I'm a doctor, I'm not a soldier." And he says, "You're whatever I say you are." And at 11:30 at night, we landed, and we had one explosion on down the beach from us, and I never got to find out how much damage occurred. There was no small arms fire at us. Occasionally a big shell would hit the beach, but none of us were involved. And this whole ship was loaded. There was an ambulance company, there was half of my medical detachment, and odds and ends of infantry. So my biggest job was to find out where they went. It took us from 11:30 at night till 4:30 in the morning to get everybody located. The beach masters knew where every major unit was. And we finished. I was about to die for a drink of water, and long ago drank my canteen full. I finally, last of all, located my group, and here were 12 5-gallon jerry cans, water at last. I opened one, and a strong odor of grain alcohol greeted me. They had emptied the water out, and grain alcohol was not an accountable item. Second jerry can, the same. All 12 of them were filled with 95% alcohol, not a drop of water for anybody to drink. I don't know whether you have any idea about water point water and the Army's idea of what's drinkable. A rubber bag hung on a tripod with iodine, chlorine, and whatever water they could locate. Some of it muddy, some of it plain. Did have potability, and I did get a drink of water before daylight. And I also, my boss was so drunk he couldn't stand up. And 12 men in my aid station, pretty well under the weather. So, I was the only sober one there. But we went into combat on the 17th of July. Just St. Lo ends with a bunch of walls here, which were the walls of buildings that had been destroyed. And Hill 210 was right behind it, a real steep hill. And that's where we made our first attack. And that's where we got that blast of artillery in the rear of our troops instead of in the German troops. One of the most brilliant events happened on that day. Our colonel, commander of the 112th, was Henry Hodges, a full colonel and a graduate of West Point High in his class, and quite a soldier. Charge you $10 if he found you in a foxhole without a tie on. But when our folks were being annihilated and we didn't have anything, we had anti-tank guns that you fire them and hit a German tank, they'd bounce off just like a cork in a cork gun. We had absolutely nothing. We had not swept the roads for mines, but Colonel Hodges and his driver took his jeep, and we had a tactical air force 3 miles behind us. The roads had not been swept for mines. But in about 20 minutes after he took off, the air was thick with P-38s and P-47s flying, and I don't think they were much over 50 feet off the ground. But it didn't take them long to dispatch 7 of those German tanks, and they turned around and ran. And we didn't have any more fighting that day. The next day, we were informed that our general, who said attack at all odds when we didn't have anything with which to attack, became a major instead of a major general, and they sent him back to Fort Benning. We had a new general, and this general admired our colonel. He thought he ought to have a Silver Star, and he had him right smack on the front, form the headquarters company of our regiment, and read a citation, had our colonel march forward. He pinned the Silver Star on him, saluted, and the colonel stepped back. One sniper bullet, and we had no business being in formation in a country where there were bushels of snipers. One bullet went through the general's neck. In 2 days, we lost 2 generals. And the next general we inherited was a fellow named Norman Coda, who had been assistant CEO of the 29th Division. And we kept him. He was smart enough to stay alive. And he was on the front all the time. We fought through the hedgerows. And then they gave us a course on how to take hedgerows. And somebody had invented a rake plow that you could put on the front of light tanks, and you could bulldoze a passageway at ground level through hedgerows. And they could make a hole that GIs could run through and lie down and fire at the enemy while the tank was backing up and getting ready to make another hole. We were having a demonstration of this new system, and our guys were on the front. We were always interested in what was going on, and we thought we could learn if we watched. The tank made the hole, and it was about 6-8 feet wide. 4 GIs ran through. We just had baths. Nice, clean, new uniforms, and they lay down in front on the ground with their guns ready to use. And would you believe that darn tank ran through again and put 3 feet of dirt on top of those 4 GIs. Our guys had already gotten our shovels out, and we got to them and didn't hurt any of them, just dirtied their clothes. But we learned how to fight through hedgerows after we had just about seen our last hedgerow. We were right on the edge of the northern French plains. But we also learned how to take a town after we had already conquered Colmar. You might be interested in what happened to Colonel Hodes. On the 9th of September of 1944, we had been stopped by a roadblock that the Germans had set up on our way toward Paris. There were 12 regimental staff members, including Colonel Hodes, gathered in a circle in a little pine thicket. All of a sudden, 120 millimeter mortar shell dropped right smack in the middle of that circle of 12. Was anybody hurt? Only our colonel. One shell fragment ripped him from his collarbone all the way down to his pelvis. It's like somebody was going to do an autopsy on him. Spilled his insides out all over sandy woods. We cleaned him as best we could, packed him up, bandaged him, and sent him off. And I never knew what happened, whether he lived or died. A lot of the staff folks had announced that he couldn't possibly survive. But at the end of the Korean War, I was watching television news one night, and General Henry Hodes came out of the tent, and he was in charge of the crew that was deliberating with the Koreans for a ceasefire. And I later traced his, and he was in charge of NATO troops, all of the occupying European forces that we had in Germany. And next, he had Colin Powell's job. He retired 4-star general. Make you feel real proud of him because I picked him out for that sort of a GI.
If you hadn't sewed him up?
Well, I didn't sew him up. We just packed him up so the hospital could do more extensive cleaning and sew him up.
So apparently you did something right.
We hope. But I never saw him anymore. I didn't know until we saw that TV that he had survived.
Tell us about your photograph and hold it up about Paris and how you came to have it. Go ahead and just tell us about it.
On the 28th of August, we were carried by truck to the Bois de Boulogne, which is a city park right outside Paris. And we were told that the FFE, that's the Free French Resistance Forces, had been able to secure Paris, that it was not going to be bombed or burned, and that the next day we were to march through Paris. It rained that night, so all of our fresh new clothes were wet, but we donned them. We made a full formation of 15,000 28th Division troops. Most of the positions were placed on the front row of their own units marching with the infantry. And I was asked, and I was the only medical officer asked to march with our battalion staff, because we only had 3 staff left alive. So I made 4. But that is how I came to be in that position, marching right behind the color bearers as we marched down the Champs-Élysées and around the Arc de Triomphe and out by Le Bourget Airport, and right on the edge in the schoolyard, we dug foxholes and were again facing the enemy.
And that day was?
29th of August, 1944.
So go ahead and pick up. So after Paris, you back on the front?
We moved northeast, and I should mention that the day before we went to the Bois de Boulogne, we were in Versailles, and Major Hazlett said, "You want to go see the palace?" And sure I did. We were in the Little Versailles Palace, which was behind the 1,800-room palace. But we went through briefly, saw some of the major things. There are 1,800 rooms there, and 3,800 people living in it. Not then, they had all vacated. But he says,
no damage.
No damage to Versailles. And the gardens weren't well kept. But as far as the building goes, it was okay. He says, "You can have this for your aid station today." So I was owner of Versailles for one whole day. After I marched through Paris, and one day we took the town of Compiègne, and this nice palace there that Marie Antoinette had built for her. And again, they says, "You can have this palace for your aid station today." Well, the Germans were running. They didn't stop to fight that day. So we had a very peaceful day in Compiègne. And then we moved on further and got into Belgium, and from there to Luxembourg. And we got to see most of Luxembourg. We took it twice. And the people were so happy to see us there. They wore boutonnieres that had red, white, and blue buttons of different sizes in their lapels. And I commented on that to a native and said, "Did you ever look on the other side of their lapel?" I said, "No, why?" He said, "You turn it up, you'll see the button on the back is black." And that's, if the Germans gain any ground back, you'll see those red, white, and blue go on the back side, and the black will go on the front. And that happened during the Battle of the Bulge.
Tell us a little bit about the Hürgen Forest that you told us a little bit earlier.
The Hürgen Forest was the southernmost part of the Siegfried Line. And I don't know how many acres were involved, but there were trees that were planted at the end of World War I. And they were probably 40 feet high, and most of them about 10 to 12 inches in diameter. And our artillery and the German artillery had just cut those trees in all directions, at all levels. Some of them had fallen all the way down, some of them had fallen part of the way, and to make any progress you had to go through them. At night, it was so black you couldn't count your fingers right in front of your face. And as I mentioned before, there was no way to know where you were going without you memorizing the communications wiring system. And I had to make that trip every night. Probably was the scariest of anything. Even the Battle of the Bulge was not that scary. But artillery would cut those wires in too because they fell anywhere. And sometimes we had a wire, and sometimes you'd reach the end of the wire and you didn't know where the rest of it was. Sometimes you'd meet a German soldier coming in the other direction and hope he realized you were medical corps. They respected us. I don't think anybody ever deliberately shot at me. But back in the Hedgerow country, I was walking by myself down a hedgerow, and all of a sudden, a bullet, face level, hit the hedgerow about 20 feet in front of me. And I kept going, and got where you didn't pay any attention to bullets, just like bees flying. And another shot was fired about 10 feet in front of me. I kept going. One more shot was fired about 6 inches from my face. And I decided somebody was trying not to hurt me and to tell me something. And I turned around and went back, and there were no firings. But you get lots of surprises. I was walking, I thought, by myself in the Hedgerow country again, and the noise made me turn and look behind me. There were 27 Germans with Mauser rifles, and there they were right behind me. I thought I was prisoner of war. But the one in front presented his rifle to me. And they had wanted to surrender, but they wanted to surrender to an American soldier who didn't have a gun. So I took 27 prisoners that day without halfway trying.
Well, get back, and let's go ahead and continue with the Battle of the Bulge.
The Battle of the Bulge was on 16th of December, 1944. I had been through the German lines treating civilians, 5 or 6 with pneumonia. And you always find out what news you want, not from the military higher-ups. Most of the time I didn't think they knew it. I collected data for G2. I learned to tell by the explosion, crater left by an 88, where it came from, how far away, and I could help direct artillery. So I helped the G2 that way. But this 16th of December, 5 or 6 civilians said, tonight's the night the Germans are going to make their big push toward the ocean. I says, oh, I've really got something to tell them now. So 13 hours before the Battle of the Bulge started, I knew it was going to happen that night. And we weren't ignorant of everything because all night long the Germans had been moving tanks up. And tanks make good bit of noise. You can hear them 2 miles away. So we knew they were fixing to do something before long. Called G2 at division headquarters 30 miles behind us on the radio. Told them civilians had told me tonight's the night the Germans are going to make their big push. And you'd have thought Santa Claus had arrived at division headquarters because of the ha-ha-ha I got on the telephone. But at 12:35, they must have realized that I knew what I was telling. We were in the little town of Bastendorf, and I guess it's maybe 1,500 yards across a little valley and mountains up on either side. We found an empty store with a glass front, and it was a 2-story building. Over the store part were 2 small bedrooms. And I took one of them, my first sergeant took the second one, and they even delivered to us Christmas packages that had come in early. And I put mine on the bed I was going to sleep in that night. 12:35, the Germans started firing 155 shells. They were on the edge of the eastern mountain. You could see the fire from the mouths of those 155s as they fired shells into our little town. The fifth shell hit our building direct and knocked the second story down in the street in front of us. Well, it didn't break the glass front on the building, but I was bandaging a soldier, and that same shell put a piece of shell fragment through the floor between the feet of that GI I was bandaging and me, and didn't touch us. And no more shells came there. But the Germans started attacking us, just rank after rank, and we had lots of ammunition. We had all of our anti-aircraft guns. You familiar with twin Bofors? They're automatic, and it didn't matter what sort of shell we had, but we were firing them horizontal. We had 4 quad 50 caliber, all anti-aircraft. We had to get the cooks to fire them. And then we had all of the heavy 50 calibers and the heavy 30 calibers. So we were wonderfully supplied with weaponry.
And lots of ammunition.
And lots of ammunition. The 3 days we were surrounded, a Sherman tank was allowed to run right through the German forces into our town and give us food, medical supplies, and ammunition. And then I went in and out anyway because the German had come and made arrangements for us to run a German-American medical service. The third night, and the medical folks didn't get much consideration when it was time to tell you about a move. At 7:24, we learned to have our own G2 system with the companies. Our G2 came in and says, do you have any knowledge of the fact that we're going to make our way out of Bastendorf at 7:30? We had a fully packed aid station in our little building, and they would have run off and left us. But our spy had let us know they were fixing to leave. And all night long, for 3 days, our pioneer platoon had turned a cow path up the other side of the mountain. It was perfectly vertical rock face on the eastern side of Bastendorf. And the Germans didn't think they needed to protect that. But the entrance onto that was not too steep. And we thought that we could get out, and we did get out with most things. But my driver slipped off the road, and we had to leave our Jeep. I ran and called a kitchen truck that had the tailgate down and jumped on it. They weren't fixing to stop. The trail was too steep, was wet and slippery, and we went to the little town of Fruitdekirk to Edelbrook. And there was a hospital with a very sturdy structure. And they told us to just gather in the basement. And I lay down on a stretcher and slept for 4 hours. I woke up, started to get up. Both my knees were locked. They were already football knees. And for 4 days, I ran my aid station from a stretcher. I had 12 guys who were superb technicians. I could tell them what to do, and they could do it well. And then we made a long move to southeastern Luxembourg in the little town of Medernach. And this was Christmas Eve. And we We had no food supply there, but you'd be surprised what good providers GIs are if you give them a chance to explore a little. They found 4 huge hogsheads full of pickled pork chops. And they even went out and cut a fir tree, and they found a bunch of Christmas decorations in the attic of the house we chose, because nobody was in the village. They had all moved out. But we had our pickled pork chops, and by the time we finished with that, we got a call from headquarters. We've got your turkeys done. We've got plenty for everybody. How in the world they got them moved, how they got them cooked, with us retreating the way we were, I don't know. But in Metternach, we joined the 6th Armored Division, which was the 3rd Army. We hadn't been in 3rd Army in a good while. But they had most of their tanks and had lost most of their infantry support. They were very happy out of our battalion, our regiment. We had 385 fighting GIs. And those guys dug in around the tanks. Germans would crawl up, throw a grenade, and blow the track off the tank. Then it's no good. But we had our second Christmas dinner. I was called to division headquarters. They announced that at 2:30 that afternoon, they were going to push off on their counterattack going northeast to take back part of Luxembourg we had lost. And at 10 o'clock the night before, the commander of the division asked me if I'd like to scout with him and see if everything was in position. And we must have traveled 10 miles, and there must have been 1,000 tanks. And those tanks were all firing just at arbitrary targets. They would pick them on a map and fire at a road junction. They were firing those 1,000 tanks every 10 minutes, all night long. 2:30 in the afternoon, Patton was the boss on this operation. We took off, and by 5:30, that's 3 hours, we were in Beaufort, Luxembourg, which is right on the northeastern corner. And we had 2 flesh wound casualties for that whole operation. And we had taken back all we had lost in 10 days of retreating. And we were very happy. But we still lost an awful lot of men. Our regiment had 3,000 men when we started, and 385 fighting men when we finished. But my admiration for Patton rose very high.
Did you ever see him?
Oh yeah, I met him, shook his hand, heard his speech that Scott gave, and it was done very well in the movie.
I've read that they used some in curse words, they couldn't use them in the films back home.
That's not so.
That's okay.
He used a few curse words, but his language was a lot better than the movies you see now. And the language of the GIs, while it was not perfectly lit quite, wasn't as bad as depicted at the present time. But during the Normandy, we switched back and forth between 1st and 3rd Army maybe as many times as 2 or 3 times a week, and you'd never know which army you were fighting in. till you were already in another army.
So tell us a little bit about being a doctor and about your own, injury and injury of your driver. Good.
Well, a medical aid station in the infantry was prepared only to do triage and first level care. Normally, 300 yards behind us was the collecting company, and they had the ambulances, and they had another medical group. And between the two of us, we still didn't have enough medical equipment. The kit they gave us had a pair of bandage scissors, a huge clamp, and for stopping small bleeders, you need a tiny sharp-pointed hemostat called Kelly. And these big ones we had were almost too big to be of much value. We had a whole lot of very well-designed bandages. The bandage part was about as big as this cardboard, and it was a padded bandage with a long roller-type gauze that you could wrap around even the whole body and tie it. We had sulfanilamide or sulfadiazine crystals, and that was our antibiotic. We had sulfadiazine tablets. That was our only antibiotic. We had penicillin, but strangely enough, the Army would not allow us to use penicillin to treat pneumonia. They reserved it for syphilis cases. And one of my jobs was once a month to give a lecture to the GIs on behaving. And we finished a whole war in Europe with 1 case of syphilis, 5 cases of gonorrhea, and 3,000 GIs. Now, the Army helped us too, but we were not in towns. We were in the fields, in the woods. Weren't a whole lot of females staying around in those areas. Later, we were in small towns where there were legitimate brothels. And I had to inspect all of those who worked in the brothel, and it was off limits with guards posted, so the GIs did not have access. And I would go in and take an hour to examine all of the inmates there and come out and be teased by the guards saying, how come you have all those privileges we don't have? We were supposed to be fined $300 for having any sort of personal, non-business contact with the Germans. And it destroyed a beautiful chance to learn German because they were friendly. We had no problem with them. And I already knew a fair amount of French. I'd had 5 years of French before we went into France. And besides medicine, our group had 2 or 3 Polacks, 1 Russian, and the Pennsylvania Dutch. I thought it was Holland Dutch. It's Deutsch in German. So they could communicate with the Germans without any problem. We had 2 guys whose parents were from Italy and they hadn't learned English yet. So we had some Italian prisoners we rescued from the Germans, and we could speak with them. And one of our aid men was a professor of Spanish at the University of Rochester. So we pretty well covered with languages. We had Polacks, and Polacks and the Russians were perfectly communicable.
Let me ask you, were you ever injured?
In Normandy, I was walking across a field with 18 guys, some of them medics, some of them infantry. A guy on my right side was the main topic of a 120 millimeter mortar shell and turned him into a hamburger. I had 18 casualties to bandage, and then I noticed I had a boot with blood in it, and I had a piece of shrapnel in my left leg. So in Normandy, I got a Purple Heart.
That didn't stop you from continuing?
No, I never lost any days from work.
And tell us a little bit about your driver.
My driver was a guy named Delmer Putney. And this is when I was in the 112th Regiment. Delmer was sent to me as an incorrigible GI. And my boss, I told you I was the assistant commander, but I was commander of the Camp Traiglog, where half of our battalion was stationed. And I don't know why he didn't get along with the other boss, because I never found him in any way unmanageable. I never gave him a job that he didn't at least try, and most of the time he did it. After we got into combat, we had some scary experiences. Once we were taking a patient on a stretcher. We had our Jeeps rigged with welded frames that would carry 4 patients on stretchers. But we had just one this time. We're driving down the road. A bullet was fired at our Jeep. It didn't hit any of the drivers. It hit the poor guy that was already wounded. And I don't think he was any worse than he was before. But Putney and I got along fine, and I never had him, he never gave him an order that he didn't do. And he was a big, husky guy. He was raised on the shores of St. Lawrence River, returned after the war there, but I didn't know about all that because 1st of October they transferred me from the 112th to the 109th, and I lost my driver. I had to start over with a new one. Putney got to be first driver for the major, who was regimental surgeon for the 112th after I was moved to the 109th. And he and the commander there didn't get along all right. He was captured during the Battle of the Bulge. So was the major, who was the commander of the whole unit. And when I finally met Putney in 96, I guess, or 90s. Anyway, we didn't know that the regiments were having reunions. And I guess we found out about the 4th one. And we went to a reunion, and Putney was there. My assistant battalion surgeon was there.
Did you recognize him?
I recognized him. He recognized me first. They got there before I did. But I asked him if he was the guy that was driving me down a rough rural road when he made a left-hand turn and the road got a lot rougher. And And soon we realized he had made a left-hand turn down railroad track by driving across the cross ties. His wife was with him, and I said, "Is this the guy that turned down a railroad track one night with me in the Jeep?" And his wife says, "I bet he's told me that 50 times. But unfortunately, I didn't know he was alive at that time. I didn't know he had been captured in the Battle of the Bulge and had been a POW of the Germans. And apparently had suffered some sort of psychological problem because they put him in a rehabilitation center after he was liberated. But 3 weeks before this reunion, he found out he had carcinoma in the head of the pancreas. And he had had the Whipple operation, but doesn't cure anybody. It just postpones the inevitable. But he had driven all the way down from St. Lawrence to Erie, Pennsylvania, because he knew her. He lived, this was in September, and he lived until June. Died.
Let's go ahead and finish up. Where were you when the war ended?
When the war ended, I was in a little town of Cusel, which I don't even know how big. I can't tell you exactly where it is. We were a part of the French army at that time, and we had changed from a fighting unit to military government. So I was furnishing health care for the German civilians. We were furnishing obstetrical service that was in Luxembourg, a Red Cross 4-story maternity center. They had 1 doctor and 12 midwives, and we tried to get the expectant mothers there. 4 times it didn't, and I delivered babies in the home and then took the mothers and the newborn babies to the hospital, and they let them stay a couple of days and then sent them back home.
You didn't have any specialized training in obstetrics, I assume?
Oh, I had delivered 200 babies at that time at Grady Hospital.
Oh, okay.
But we didn't have any forceps and a few things like that that a
few details.
obstetrician would need. We had.
On the civilians, how were their health degraded by being in the German, occupation, nutrition, and that sort of thing? Or did they?
Right after the hostilities were over, I had loaned 2 medical officers from Paris, from the French Army. I had my 12 unit medical officers. We went to a little town called Altenglan. It was mostly a mining, quarrying town. And we processed in 12 days 100,000 German slave laborers who came through on the trains, about 700 on each train. And we had the train station set up, and I had the best chance to learn medical French you ever saw. I had a French doctor from Paris just on the other side of a curtain and a screen that separated me from his examining table and his work. If I ran into a word I didn't know, all I had to do is yell across the screen, and his name was Roger Gumpelson. He got to be a real good friend, as well as quite a source of information. But we saw a very healthy looking group of guys, and they had an identification plastic card. On the back of it they had a little strip map, and with colored wax crayon, the route that they had to go from where they worked to where they slept. And they swore that they had not been given anything to eat except mashed potatoes.
For how long?
4 years.
Really? And yet their health was...
They looked healthy. I must say, we did
These were French
men who were
working German mines.
lots of like factories and other things, but they had been, I guess, just kidnapped by the Germans and brought into their work arena. And we had 65,000 Russians same way, and we had about 1,700 Italians, all of whom had been impressed into German factories and different sources.
Were they in similar conditions still?
They were in similar good condition. So
when did you leave the service and get back home? And
November the 7th, I went on terminal leave. I spent all my time in the service up to that point without a day's leave. I had 5-day pass, which didn't count against my leave, to go to London. I had a similar pass to go to Paris. And I had 120 days of terminal leave. I had to get back. I had an appointment to restart my training at Emory on November the 7th, but actually I was dismissed from the service on the 20th of January.
Before 6. So tell us a little bit about the rest of your life. You were married, of course, before
Yes.
you went into the service.
And we decided not to have a family until I got back, if I got back.
So tell us a little bit more about your medical training. You took like postgraduate work in...
Until August 1st, 1951. And I had come back to work at the beginning of the Emory Clinic with Dr. Elliot Scarborough. I gave Scarborough brand new one of those daggers, and don't know what happened.
Hold it up and show it to us.
This is a dagger that was part of the dress of Hitler's youth group. I brought 5 of them back, but all of them got away except this one.
Keep an eye on that one.
This was the armband. We wore one on each arm. We had 4 red crosses in a white field on our helmet, except once during the Hurtgen Forest, we were told the Germans were shooting at red crosses. I never had one shoot at me. And, we did lots of things for entertainment. This is part of a K-ration box, and the end of them was out of 3/4 inch board, and this had 2 links on it, but somebody didn't realize it's not very tough wood, and so I lost it. But I wanted to see if I could carve the links and if I could make that ball loose inside a cage, and I did all that with one little pocket knife. And let's see, you gonna tell about that? We did some leather carving.
This is just to keep yourself busy.
Well, there were times we spent a year when we weren't fighting, and we had some special. Can you guess how that was made? If I show you this, you can. It was against federal law to damage American silver coins in any way. But this is a British half crown. You hammer it on the edge until they get small enough to be your ring. You drill out the inside. The rest of it's done by filing. and we used crocus cloth, which the kitchen used to keep their vessels shiny and get rid of the rust and soot. But I sent this home to Louise with an initial on it.
We need to kind of finish up. So you did medical training until 1951?
I'll show you one of them.
Oh, okay. Yeah, why don't we go ahead and...
All right, halfway across France, they decided paratroopers and everybody had special badge. So they gave a combat medical badge to all troops, enlisted and officers who were part of medical units on the front line. And that's mine. I still have it. In Cusel, we had a parade last day, May the 7th. And when they got through, the general pinned this Bronze Star on me.
Hold it up for me. Ah, there it is. That's good. That's your Bronze Star.
That's my Bronze Star. My Purple Heart, somebody liked it better than I did. My ETO ribbon has 5 Bronze Stars, and those were all of the major campaigns that any one person could be in. Southern France was going on with Northern France, so we couldn't get both of them. This is the American Theater ribbon, and this is my Bronze Star. And we also had a unit Croix de Guerre from France, and since then have been given a unit Croix de Guerre from Belgium and Luxembourg. And in 1947, we got a presidential citation, which I got in 1996. So I never got it on a uniform. Let's see. This is the French Croix de Guerre.
Well, we need to go ahead and tie it up and tell us about, so you trained until 51, and then family, I assume you practiced medicine until when?
I opened an office. I was an instructor at Emory. I worked at Grady Hospital for 14 years, and they would pay you $25 a day. It cost you more than that to keep your private office open. But there were 3 doctors who for an interminable time were all of the thoracic surgeons available to cover 15 hospitals in this metropolitan area. So we covered the 15 hospitals, and the hours were long and hard. There was no Medicare. You didn't have insurance as widespread as it is now. I mean, nobody had any money, so neither did we. And then came along open heart surgery, and I took some training at the University of Minnesota with Walton Lilly High and Barco, and we later worked at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester with Dwight Magoon and John Kirkland. And
those must have been exciting days in medicine. You could do so much more for people.
I taught courses in nursing chest surgery patients because regular courses, nobody knew anything about it, and some of the care was very special. And I gave a course in how to nurse chest surgery patients at St. Joseph, at George Baptist, at Crawford Lawn, and at Piedmont. And the 3 of us rotated. When one got through, one of the other 2 would take over. And took us 2 years to learn how to use the heart pump. And we sacrificed about 100 dogs. And those dogs were furnished by the Decatur Dog Pound. But we interested 3 veterinarians with helping us. They found dogs for us, and most of these dogs had advanced heartworms, and we found out that we could put these dogs on the pump, open up their heart under a pump oxygenator, get the worms out of their heart, and give them a heart that could function again. And they had drugs that would kill the larvae and eggs of the heartworms in the bloodstream. They couldn't get rid of the worms that were already adult in the heart. But we got where over 90% of our animals were survived, and we cured lots of dog heartworms, a disease that they'll tell you can't be cured. But we did, and the vets never had trouble. They would take care of the animals during their post-operative period. They would find homes without any problem for a dog that had had open heart surgery and had survived.
So you practiced on dogs until you felt like you
That's correct.
On people. And you did the first? Where was that?
St. Joseph's.
What year? What then?
1957.
So when did you retire?
Well, when you're 75 in this city, you're not a surgeon any longer. Your privileges are destroyed. I was lucky enough to get a job as medical director for an organization called Metropolitan Atlanta Foundation for Medical Care, which is not any of that. It's a peer review organization. I worked with as many as 302 doctors, and they were organized into 27 panels in 27 specialties. And during the next 9 years, I think I probably learned more medicine. When you're in a narrow field, you tend to devote most of your time trying to keep up with that field. But we covered everything, including psychiatry and dermatology, and I had a bunch of very expert volunteers, and they would review individual charts, but we would collect the difficult charts. And once a month, they would meet at night, and we would discuss the difficult cases. And my job was mostly to write letters giving our results. But I learned a lot from all these very expert guys who had to consider these problem cases.
And so how do you spend your time now in retirement?
Cutting the grass, picking blackberries. I'm writing another book.
So you wrote this book. Why don't you hold it up? We'll go ahead and take a quick picture of it. Just hold it up and you wrote that book. Tell us just very briefly, you wrote it.
I wrote it in 18 months, bit at a time, and I wrote it from letters and from, I have 1 year of journals while we were not in combat. So those were the sources.
And what book are you writing now?
Our church in 1970 sent groups of doctors and dentists and about 50 young folk from our church who were between 14 and 24 years of age. And we went to Honduras for 4 years. We brought one open heart case up and did him at George Baptist, sent him back nice and pink. Then
what church is this now?
Northside Drive Baptist. You know where it is? It's right where Northside Park
Yes, sir.
41 and Northside Drive split apart. They sent us into the Eastern Caribbean, and I finished the Honduras part. And she got to go to Honduras and see where we were working. She couldn't land because it was too far, and it was a long mule-back ride to get to the towns where we worked. But one year we had 6 clinics, the other years we had 4, and we bought a house and turned the alcalde's aging mother's home into a chapel that would seat 250 people, give us a covered waiting room. We always went in rainy seasons. Rarely did it miss a day, giving a tropical downpour. They would actually hurt when the water hit you. We are now going to Dominica, which is the northernmost of the Windward Islands in the Lesser Antilles. And we were 2 years there, 2 years in Grenada, 2 years in St. Vincent.
So you haven't retired?
And, well, we haven't done any of that in quite a while. So,
Well, Dr. Davis, I want to thank you for taking your time out and bringing your most interesting story. And now we have it on tape for future historians. Thanks again.